It is a wonder in itself that this exposition contained so many extraordinary accomplishments. We look upon images and read through publications of a time in American history that represents abundance, revolving around the anniversary of discovery. And what are anniversaries if not the punctuations of history? They are the emphasis given to events, not by the song of the poet or by the pen of the rhetorician, but by the common acclaim of mankind. They are the monuments of the heroes and the saviors of the race. They are the memnons which fill the heart with promise, the eve with gladness, and the ear with song. Thank you for joining me, and let's explore what wonders aided such a prolific punctuation of history in the Columbian Exposition of 1893. Let's begin. Consider that last passage a bit closer. A product of the time, indeed, yet what is the purpose of punctuation? It ends a thought or separates one from the start of another. It may change the tone, which could alter the thought or even trajectory of the story, depending on the emphasis of the punctuation. It stops, it begins, a transfer into the next stage of the story. It can be a smaller shift from sentence to sentence, or considerably more incremental from paragraph to paragraph. Consider the shift from chapter to chapter, or even from entire volumes, book to book. Take into account how some of the following wonders aided this particular punctuation within the historical timeline. We will explore these wonders in depth, showcasing some of the more notable attractions, such as the Ferris wheel, while delving into a few of the lesser-known attractions like the revolutionary brick-making machines or the diamond-cutting exhibit at Tiffany & Co. Included will be some bite-sized information of various principal sites of the exposition, artifacts, attractions, or unusual pieces that were considered a must-see at the event. Let's get this rolling with the Ferris wheel. The following passages and notes coming from the World's Columbian Exposition report of the Committee on Awards of the World's Columbian Commission, the same source from the end of the last episode discussing architecture. Our story begins before the event with America's engineers and architects who gathered for a weekend club. Discussions of architectural features were had. Insults were hurled as Burnham himself stated that the buildings were great, but the engineers have done nothing. It seems to be a constant yardstick measuring contest between Chicago and Paris, specifically the exposition of 1889 that unveiled the Eiffel Tower, for they needed to out-Eiffel the Eiffel with something other than a tower. What could be done? Fortunately, seated at the table, listening to Mr. Burnham's remarks, was a tall, slight young engineer with a pale, resolute face. This was George W.G. Ferris, senior partner in the firm of G.W.G. Ferris & Co., bridge builders and inspecting engineers. After casting several things over in his mind, the idea of a great observation wheel came to him like an inspiration. The inspiration of the moment was a stroke of genius. The original sketch was so perfect that it was carried out in its entirety. Not a single change was made. This was no easy task, as Mr. Ferris's plans were for the tension wheel, and the stresses for such a structure had never before been computed. There was absolutely no data upon the subject, no precedent to follow. So the methods of calculating and designing had to be originated and thoroughly proven by mathematical demonstration. In the spring of 1892, Mr. Ferris went to the Ways and Means Committee of the World's Columbian Exposition with his plans for a vertical revolving wheel 250 feet in diameter and capable of carrying 2,260 people at a load. His ideas were accounted as those of a visionary and an enthusiast. He became known as the man with wheels in his head. One member of the committee said that the wheel would be a monstrosity and out of keeping with the dignity of the exposition. Others thought it was a waste of time to further consider a thing that would certainly be a failure. Even engineers doubted its practicability. Some claimed that it could not be built, others that it could not be operated even if it was built. Renewed and persistent efforts to secure the concession to build the wheel inside the grounds finally resulted in a concession being granted for this purpose, not in Jackson Park itself, but in the Central Avenue Midway Plaisance, by the terms of this concession, which was granted on December 16, 1892. It was now midwinter and only 4 months until the opening of the exposition. The mills, machine and bridge shops over the country were full to overflowing with orders. But Mr. Ferris never hesitated an instant. His intimate knowledge of the mills and machine shops throughout the country, gained in his business as a bridge builder and inspector, was now of incalculable value to him and to his project. Contracts were let to a dozen different firms, each being chosen because of some peculiar fitness for the work entrusted to it. Absolute precision was necessary, as few of the parts could be put together until they were upon the ground, and an error of the smallest fraction of an inch might be fatal. Meanwhile, the foundation work was proceeding slowly and under many difficulties. The winter was the most severe that Chicago had experienced for many years. The frost at the wheel site was 3 feet deep. The quicksand was 20 feet in depth and saturated with water. All of this had to be excavated, and a solid concrete monolith, interspersed with steel beams resting upon piles driven through blue clay to hardpan, 32 feet from the surface, was built to get a secure foundation for the towers. Pumps were kept running night and day to keep out the water, and live steam had to be used to thaw the sand and broken stone. On the 20th day of March, 1893, the first tower post was put in place. Soon after came the problem of raising the axle. This axle was 45 feet long, 32 inches in diameter, and weighed 45 tons. Upon the axle were 2 immense spiders, or hubs, each weighing 12.5 tons. This immense weight of 70 tons was lifted 140 feet and placed in beams upon the towers in 2 hours' time. Meanwhile, the power plant has been put into place. The boilers were on Lexington Avenue between 60th and 61st Streets, over 700 feet away, and outside the grounds. Steam was conveyed to the engines by an underground 10-inch wrought iron pipe, the exhaust steam being carried back to the boilers by a second underground pipe. As soon as the last connection was made, preparations were immediately made to turn the great wheel. Mr. Ferris was in the east on pressing business when the final connections were made, but had given parting instructions to turn the wheel or tear it off the towers. It was a critical moment. The wheel revolved steadily and surely, and doubting Thomases were silenced. These cars were 26 feet long, 13 feet wide, and about 9 feet high, with plate glass windows and a door at each end. 38 fancy, twisted steel chairs were in each one. There were 36 cars in all, one being hung at each panel point at the extreme end of the spokes. Mrs. Ferris was present and bravely determined to make the first trip. The opening day was set for the 21st of June. Mr. Ferris, in a happily framed speech, called attention to the fact that he had gotten the wheels out of his head and made them a living reality. In closing, he dedicated his work to the engineers of America. Mrs. Ferris then presented him with a golden whistle, which he blew as a signal for starting the wheel. Not one of the 1.75 million passengers carried was injured in any way. The story of the pug dog jumping out of one of the car windows was concocted by some space writer who was short on news and long on invention. Equally false were the reports that the wheel stopped for some hours with a number of people in the top cars. There were no delays or halts of any kind. The engine always had up steam and there was always a clear track and no breakdowns. No breakdowns. This record of almost 5 months constant running for such an intricate mass of mechanism without a single hitch is simply marvelous. It is an added triumph to American engineering ability and skill. The towers, fence, and wheel were studded with 3,000 incandescent lights. But though the night view from the wheel was equal to a glimpse of fairyland, the night trip never became popular. The capacity of the wheel was never taxed, even on Chicago Day when there were 34,433 paid admissions. On the 19th of October, there were 1,784 people on the wheel during one trip. The largest number of people carried in any 1 hour was about 4,000. The view from the wheel on a clear day was magnificent, but as the patronage upon a dark, smoky day was nearly as large as upon a perfectly clear one, the conclusion is almost forced upon one that the people were much more interested in the daring design and unique structure planned and built by Mr. Ferris than they were in the landscape, views, or effects, no matter how beautiful they may have been. And that concludes our story of the magnificent Ferris wheel at the Columbian Exposition. Despite George Ferris and his engineering bridge building company experience, what are the odds that his original idea, which was sketched out perfectly and did not require any modifications or changes, ended up being the final iteration of this engineering wonder? This is not necessarily impossible, yet does this resemble the story of inventors or inventions in general, creating something entirely novel and hitting the proverbial bullseye in every aspect, from its inception to its completion? Suppose we all need to channel our inner George Ferris when developing ideas or projects, or even inventions. Considering no structure like this was ever completed, there was absolutely no data, no precedent to follow. Yet this observational wheel was invented, planned or drawn, components developed, sourced, milled, delivered, foundation excavated, pilings installed, underground subways underway, electrical components applied, along with the construction of the wheel itself within a brief time. All of this happening roughly 4 months before the opening of the event, and the trial trip with Mrs. Ferris happening on June 11th of 1893. Afterwards, the wheel worked flawlessly. No issues, no breakdowns. Absolute perfection. An engineering marvel to out-Eiffel the Eiffel had been a screaming success. Indeed, the first wonder of this presentation and of the Columbian Exposition. Let's take a look at a few exhibits and points of interest here coming from the principal sites and exhibits of the Columbian Exposition. A unique exhibit from Pennsylvania is a map of the United States, 18 by 24 feet, made entirely of pickles, vegetables, fruits, etc., preserved by the company which makes the exhibit. The state lines are accurately shown and the lakes and rivers are represented by vinegar. The larger cities are indicated by spices. The whole is covered with a single piece of plate glass, which was specifically made for the purpose. The expense of this interesting exhibit of the pickling and preserving industry is $15,000. The cottage in which George Fox, the founder of the Society of Friends or Quakers, was born in, now bear with me here, Leicestershire, England, has been taken and re-erected in Chicago. Left out an O here. A 100-year-old bearing orange tree from San Gabriel is one of the exhibits from California. The lofty stone monolith which Wisconsin exhibits will remain at Jackson Park permanently, the park commissioners having given their consent. The monolith is 107 feet high and cut from a solid block of stone. Unsure if that still exists in the modern day at Jackson Park. The next wonder is worth 1,000 words. Having been around for roughly half a century, it was both comfortable and novel. An interesting section next regarding the art of photography. Let's read about it regarding the fair and the future of the art. Photography has before it, by its own component elements, unique, the possibility of a great future, and is worthy of one of the most artistic talent. Who shall properly represent her capabilities to the countless millions yet to come? There is no branch of science and art but in which photography is every day employed. It is used by the medical man to record and prove all forms of disease, the surgeon to record his operation and condition of a patient, as a truthfully illustrated record of the facts, thus shown to simplify and wonderfully aid the future treatment of similar cases. And it is plain to see that while disease is a condition more or less in the life of every individual, that this phase of photography is of permanent value for its truth-telling story. Take note of how this is written. The rhetoric. Photography shows a large advance since the original daguerreotype, plate, or metallic copper, so slow as to require the best portion of 1 hour in bright sunlight to produce a picture, to that of the common feat now instantaneously performed. So sensitive are the prepared surfaces to light, of accurately securing in softly diffused light most swiftly moving objects, such as the modern express trains, trotting horses, etc. There is hardly an exception the world over where photography is not used in the makeup of that great educator, the newspaper, etching in line, and stipple for illustrations. It is now a common occurrence for the photographist to supply the proof and see the picture printed in the newspaper that comes to him 1 hour later. There seems now to be little doubt that a short period of time may elapse before we will be sending any photographic reproduction desired from country to country over the electrical wire, as is done with the telegraphic message of today. And how fitting will be this union of photography and electricity is apparent to all when I recall the devotion of Professor Morse to photography at the very time of his wonderful invention of practical telegraphy. An English writer of ability and probity says, "The international survey of the heavens is now in progress, and many thousands of negatives of the stars have already been obtained. And when this survey is complete, the present face of the sky will be known with an accuracy which the astronomers of a pre-photographic age never dreamed. Orthochromatic, or color value photography, although but in its infancy, promise great things in the near future. It is of the greatest assistance to the photographist, enabling him to more truthfully present his work. Orthochromatic plates are now made commercially in America, and there is no doubt that in the hands of first-class operators, they must supplant the plain bromide plate, as the latter have the wet collodion plates. They must materially assist in finally securing photographs in the colors of nature. To Professor H.W. Vogel of Berlin are we indebted for this great advance in the orthochromatic photography. In this process, it is necessary to make 3 negatives, one for each of the 3 primary colors, one for yellow, one for blue, and one for red, then transfer on zinc and etch. One of the great advances in photography is that of a celebrated French scientist taking pictures direct in all colors of nature. And more recently, even since the opening of this Columbian Exposition, still further progress has been made by other scientists of France, from which much can be hoped, for there is every indication they will improve these processes. Also, one of the most wonderful discoveries in connection with photography is the tachyscope of German origin and perfected under the auspices and with the aid of the German government. In this novel instrument can be seen men and animals in motion, not merely silhouettes, but photographs full of detail and modulation. Lenses and cameras are innumerable. Cameras or machines have been perfected and connected with electricity so that a picture, portrait, or view is taken, developed, and finished, ready for delivery. Though yet producing work only in small sizes, they are exceedingly interesting. And now for portrait photography. What a field for usefulness herein lies. As was fittingly expressed by Judge James B. Bradwell of Chicago in his opening address at the World's Congress Auxiliary, when he said, "Can we fully estimate the value of a photograph of Christopher Columbus if it could be shown as he landed upon our shores 400 years ago? Are his portraits satisfactory? We may admire the work of the great masters of the past and the portrait painters of the present, but no human hand or agency can equal the sunlight of the Almighty for producing lifelike and accurate features of our friends as we know them now. The quality of work in many exhibits is simply superb, in some cases of rather low quality, but the average of all is far above the work usually shown. The four nations, England, France, Germany, and America, as usual, and all are about equal in merit. Is there any art or science upon which so much depends as photography? The astronomer, the surgeon and physician, the architect, the engineer, the minister, the lawyer, and the judge in the administration of justice, and it may be added this world's Columbian Exposition, are more or less aided by photography, the willing, truthful handmaid and servant of all. And now, as we stand upon the conquests of the past, let me just read that again. And now, as we stand upon the conquests of the past, representing achievements progressive in all the various departments of photography, what, indeed, may we not confidently hope for in this beautiful and fascinating art? In conclusion, I feel impelled to again cite the words of our friend, the learned judge, where he asks, "Who shall say that the camera, adjusted by the hand that feels and focused by the eye that sees beyond, with the aid of intensely sensitive plates, shall not bring to light and view the forms of our departed friends, and thus solve the problem of immortality and life?" Truly a valuable piece of technology to document and display. A visual storytelling of events, giving them an immortality for future generations who are able to peer back in time at these depictions, capturing the moment almost instantaneously at this time. It is truth-telling, or the truthful handmaid and servant of all disciplines that could benefit from its ability. A wonder still to this day. Indeed. Let's check back in with some more exhibits here. We read, "The Chemical National Bank of Chicago, having been granted the privilege of establishing and operating a bank on the exposition grounds, will afford the exhibitors and visitors all the conveniences and safeguards of a metropolitan bank, including safety deposit vaults." Very interesting. How about this one? This one is incredibly interesting. The administration building has a mosaic floor costing $5,000. Not wood, a mosaic floor. W.L. Libby and Sons of Toledo have erected on Midway Plaisance a factory in which the manufacture of cut glass can be seen, from the furnace on through the cutting, finishing, and decorating departments, until the finished product is turned out. The factory is a structure 125 by 200 feet of stone, iron, and glass, and with imposing dome. The firm spent $40,000 on the building alone. Now, even though the Libby Glass Company has a minor section here, we're going to expand on it here briefly, as it was quite an impressive structure and exhibit. Here is the exhibit of the Libby Glass Company, showing not only its products but a complete working establishment, with modern machinery and apparatus for manufacture. The main vestibule leads into a semicircular glasshouse, or blowing room, with melting furnace in the center, in the form of a truncated cone. Just within its circumference and a little above the base are the melting pots, enclosed in a metallic canopy, the heat which enters from below being generated from crude petroleum pumped through pipes from Ohio wells. After being subjected to a heat of more than 2,000 degrees of Fahrenheit, the crude materials are in the form of a molten mass, ready for the blowpipe of the gatherer, who, reaching into one of the pots, takes up a little of the substance upon the end of his hollow rod and passes it to the blower. The latter rolls it briskly upon an iron slab and then, as required, expands it by blowing through the pipe in a downward position, or contracts it by directing the pipe upward. When the material has reached the proper consistency, it is turned with a solid iron rod and by means of wooden tools shaped into plaques, plates, and other forms. After leaving the blowing room, all glassware is subjected to a graduated or annealing heat, so tempering it as to resist changes in temperature. Above the blowing room and the tempering oven are quarters for the cutters with their steel wheels, the smoothers with their wheels of sandstone, and the polishers with the wheels of wood. Abrading substances being used of various degree of hardness. A more interesting process than any, though of less practical value, is the manufacture of what is termed glass cloth. But this is too complex here to be described in details. Other departments belong to the engravers and etchers, and those who decorate the various articles in appropriate colors. Finally, there is the crystal art room, wherein are displayed the finished products of the factory. Ebony woodwork forms an effective setting for the cut glassware at the sides of the room. The upholsterings and tapestries of spun glass in the center. Let me just read that again. I find that fascinating. The upholsterings and tapestries of spun glass in the center, and the ceiling decorations made of the same material. At the entrance is a so-called Henry Clay punch bowl of 1812 in pressed glass, which, though of excellent workmanship, is in marked contrast with the cut glass bowl at its side, recently manufactured by the company. Attention is also attracted to ice cream sets encased in brass-bound morocco, to sherbet and punch jugs of Roman design, to quaint decanters of Venetian shape, graceful celery trays, ice tubes, honey dishes, and a lamp of elaborate pattern, designed for a banquet hall. Among articles in spun glass there are curtains, portieres, and decorations for ceilings and walls with lampshades and other fancy articles beautifully painted, all of them intended to show the adaptability of spun glass to artistic purposes. So, after going through that brief section on the Libby Glass Company, it does present another example of how substantial infrastructure was created for this event. Indeed, an entire operation fit for all stages of creating intricate glassware on display for the guests to explore and discover. Next is a quick look into diamonds that were on display at the exposition. The exhibit by Tiffany & Co. in the Mines building of a complete diamond cutting establishment, employing a force of skilled workmen at diamond cutting, is remarkable, and that this exhibit is appreciated and is evinced by the crowd of men and women constantly striving for a sight of the interesting process of cleaving, cutting, and polishing the diamond. The work at this establishment is faultless. No praise of mine is adequate. One of the strongest attractions at the fair, it merits the highest award, for nowhere else in the world is there an establishment where such excellent work is done. And here, just another quick note. In the Liberal Arts building, I found the Tiffany & Co. exhibit of diamonds a great attraction. Perhaps the greatest attraction of the fair. Each day, the gates were constantly besieged by a crowd of men and women eager to see this exhibit. After that brief passage is a list of remarkable diamonds and other jewelry of note. Moving on, we have some additional sites here worthy of mention. A solid gold brick weighing 500 pounds and worth $150,000 is exhibited in the Mines and Mining building by a Helena mine owner. The chief motive power for the machinery at the exposition is supplied by a gigantic engine furnished free to the exposition by the E.P. Alice Company, Milwaukee. The engine is furnished as a part of the company's exhibit, upon a special contract providing that it be used for the motive power and that no other engine of equal size be exhibited. It is an engine of the quadruple expansion type and is of between 3,000 and 4,000 horsepower. Compared with this engine, the big Corliss that was exhibited at the Centennial Exposition is almost a dwarf. In 1886, the Corliss was considered one of the wonders of the exposition, but its builder rated it at only 1,400 horsepower, or less than half of the one being built by the Alice Company. The Alice exhibit represents an outlay of $175,000. The United States Patent Office exhibits as complete a collection as possible of the models of all the important American patented inventions, with a view to showing the great advance in the several arts, which is due in no small degree to the encouragement and protection afforded by the patent system. The generators that furnish electricity for the 93,000 incandescent lamps at the World's Fair are the largest in the world. One of them operates 20,000 lamps. The ordinary generator supplies but 1,200 lamps, Mr. Westinghouse said, and most of them less. Our largest generator supplies 20,000 lamps, and most of the others are of 10,000 lamp capacity each. New York State exhibits complete data including photographs of all the monuments which have been erected to soldiers of that state who served in the War of the Revolution, the War of 1812, and the War of 1861. On the inland waterways which traverse the World's Fair grounds, from one end to another, there are plying three kinds of boats for public use. These are the omnibus, express, and cab boats or launches. The omnibus boats make regular trips around the waterways, stopping at each building. The express boats make round trips without stopping, while the cab boats, with carrying capacity of 4 persons, may be hailed at any point and engaged for the trip or by the hour, as is a hansom cab. Accommodations for musical entertainments include a recital hall seating 500 people, a music hall with accommodations for 120 players, 300 singers, and an audience of 2,000. A festival hall for performances upon the largest possible scale, with 200 players, 2,000 singers, and an audience of 7,000. The music hall contains a fine concert organ, and in festival hall is placed an organ for chorus support. So additionally, 2 organs within these 2 different halls. The California Capitol is represented in miniature by an exhibition of pickles. Again, the women of Fresno County will distribute 2,500 pounds of raisins in souvenir boxes. A playing fountain of wine forms a feature of the viticultural display, or the viticultural display. From here, we are going to delve into some information regarding bricks and the brick-making process. The use of brick dates prior to the time to which our histories reach. In fact, it is said that the children of Seth, the son of Adam, built 2 pillars, one of brick and one of stone, and they inscribed upon each of them the discoveries they had made concerning the heavenly bodies, so that their inventions might be preserved to mankind and not lost before they became sufficiently known. Brick was the building material of the antediluvian days. Very interesting. Let me just read that again. Brick was the building material of the antediluvian days, and it has continued to be building material down to the present time. In tracing development in the art of brickmaking, we find that progress has often been slow and uncertain. It has flourished in the ages of prosperity with other arts, and like them, it has been lost in ages of darkness. But as with them, it awoke with the Renaissance and is steadily improving with the progress of time and the spread of knowledge. The brickwork of the first 2 centuries of the Christian era, the crowning period of art in Rome, was superior to any other. In the 3rd century, there was barely a perceptible change, but in the 4th, there was a most decided deterioration, and brickwork went back with the times, old material being reused extensively, as in the Arch of Constantine. Knowledge of the art of brickmaking has probably at no time become entirely extinct in the East, but after the 4th century, in symphony with the decline of all other arts and the dying Roman civilization, the knowledge of this art gradually expired and was lost to Western Europe. The art of brickmaking did not revive in England until the 13th century. Only a few instances of 14th century brickwork occur, and they are toward the close of this style, but in the 15th century brickwork became common. In 1625, their size was regulated and made nearly uniform. After the Great Fire of London in September 1666, brick was the material universally used in the reconstruction. In 1784, brick were subjected to taxation by George III, which burden was not repealed until 1850, and it is from this period that the general improvement in brickmaking machinery commenced in both the United States and England. From 1850 to about 1870, the soft clay machines, operated by horsepower, were mostly used. One of the great difficulties usually encountered by the manufacturers of building brick who have established extensive works near large bodies of clay is to get sufficient clay dug, loaded, and elevated to meet the demand for the material. There are a large number of mechanical clay diggers now manufactured and designed to perform the work described, but the Bernhardt steam shovel, built by the Marion Steam Shovel Company, Marion, Ohio, will dig clay enough for from 150,000 to 200,000 brick daily, and by its use, modernized yards can enlarge their capacity as desired. For the molding of stiff clay brick, many different machines have been made, and England and Germany stand prominent with the United States in the construction of suitable machinery for this purpose. We have selected such machines of this class as seem to have the most prominent features, together with the latest improvements for the purpose of description. In New York, where the manufacture of brick reaches over 100 million per annum, it was noticed that stiff mud-made brick would not last as well as those made of soft clays, and attention was called to the fact in the National Convention of Brick Manufacturers by experienced and conscientious brick manufacturers. Fortunately, some experts of large experience in the manufacture and operating of brick-making machinery were present at the convention, and as those experts were persons of practical knowledge acquired in Germany, England, Australia, and America, they afterward pointed out by publication wherein the cause of the disintegration of the brick could be found, namely in the improper construction of the molding devices. The different methods of drying bricks may be classed as follows. First, when bricks are spread out on the ground to be dried by sunshine. Second, the shed system, where stiff mud brick are hacked under sheds and dried by natural air currents. Soft mud bricks are dried on the same principle, by use of racks and pallets. Third, by artificial heat. The first and oldest method of employing artificial heat for desiccating bricks being to dry them by layering or hacking them on a hot floor. This is known as a hot floor or flue dryer. The disadvantages of drying bricks in the sun are that they are exposed to rain and frost, and the percentage of brick damaged and lost will average 15%. Again, there is no certainty about the supply of sunshine. While it is furnished without price, it is also furnished without regularity, and sometimes for 2 weeks at a time, no bricks are dried. Hence, the brickmaker who depends on this process of drying has an uncertain output indeed. There are only 6 months in the year during which they can be dried in this way, and only a part of this time is available. Where bricks are made in great quantities, a large area for drying the bricks is needed, as it must contain nearly a week's production. This necessitates the moving of the brick long distances from machine to yard and from yard to kilns, and also the handling of large quantities of lumber to protect the brick, which requires a great deal of labor and destroys in a season many thousand feet of the very best lumber. The advantages of sheds over the sunshine process are there is no loss by storm and no lumber to handle. The general advantages of artificial drying over natural are many, without reference to the advantages of one mode of artificial drying over another mode of artificial drying. With an artificial drying and a machine capable of producing 25,000 bricks per day, a brickmaker can make 6 million to 7 million per year. To dry without artificial heat, it would require 2 machines of 25,000 capacity to produce the same number of bricks in a year. One of the difficult problems for solution by brickmakers has been the successful drying of brick and other clay products. The hot floor heated by coal fires was the first artificial dryer known to the trade. About 1864, the iron floor, heated with exhaust steam by day and live steam by night, came into practical use among fire brick manufacturers. In or about the year 1874, the steam tunnel dryer was the first introduced, and at its inception was a very crude affair, being built without any provision for draft or circulation, and owing to repeated failures, it was known by many brickmakers as a sweating box. Another candidate soliciting the brick manufacturer's favor was the tunnel dryer, heated with coils of steam pipe and the hot air circulated by a large revolving fan placed at one end. A subsequent rival was the steam tunnel dryer, with natural circulation, effected by the use of air ducts and 1 or 2 large stacks. To overcome all the difficulties encountered by the foregoing processes, the Frey Scheckler Company were led to manufacture what is known as the Bucyrus or the Bucharest Steam Tunnel Dryer. The circulation of this dryer is as near perfection as it can be. And from there is an assortment of various brick-making machines and their descriptions. So, a very interesting set of data points. This certainly demystifies the creation of brick at the very least. We have here machines that can produce brick at quite an astounding volume, having the ability to create 20 to 50,000 bricks per 10-hour day. With one mill or machine, some stated that they could produce upwards of 75,000 per day. Let's put this into some perspective. If we have one machine making an amount of 50,000 bricks per day, and it is solely for supplying the brick for our beautiful art building nestled on the lagoon, which contained 13 million brick, stated in Jackson's famous photographs, that would take roughly 260 days. We could then divide that number again if there were more than a single machine working on this project. This does indeed provide some serious consideration for production. However, the myriad of other logistical steps in order to source raw materials, transport the material to the mills, create the bricks, fire the bricks, dry the bricks, store them, and then finally transport the bricks must be considered also. Again, by no means is this an indication of impossibility. These are only steps in the process that should be considered, and surely there are more that have been missed within the process just illustrated. Let's explore some more sites and exhibits here. In front of the administration building, the largest fountain in the world tosses gracefully streams and excites the admiration of millions of spectators. It was constructed in Paris by sculptor McMonnies, who is acknowledged to be one of the very best of living artists. The idea of the fountain is that of an apotheosis of modern liberty, Columbia, and takes the shape of a triumphal barge guided by time, heralded by fame, and rowed by 8 standing figures, representing on one side the arts, and on the other, science, industry, agriculture, and commerce. This barge is preceded by 8 seahorses, forming a semicircle in front and mounted by 8 young men as outriders, who represent modern commerce. The smallest figure is some 12 feet in height, and the largest 20 feet. The design of the basin is circular, 150 feet in diameter, and is flanked on each side by columns 50 feet high, surmounted by eagles. The water is furnished by a great circle of dolphins in the rear and by a system of jets which entirely surround the barge and figures. At night, the fountain is illuminated by electricity after the principle employed in fountains in the Champ de Mars. Visitors to the exposition will be able to go comfortably and expeditiously from one part of the grounds to another, and obtain advantageous views of the buildings. They may do this either in electric boats through the lagoons, or by intramural elevated electric railway. For the latter, there are 5 miles of double track, and stations at convenient points. The route, as mapped out, runs from one end to the other of the grounds in a sinuous course. The fare is 5 cents and the capacity of the road about 20,000 an hour. Jackson Park will retain as one of its permanent attractions the building which Japan has erected for its headquarters at the exposition. The building is modeled after one of the most famous and architecturally unique of Japan's ancient temples, and with its surrounding garden cost $70,000. About 40,000 square feet are occupied. The South Park commissioners have accepted the offer of S. Tagima, representative of the Mikado, to give the structure to Chicago on condition that it be kept permanent and in repair, and that one room in it be devoted to a public exhibit of Japanese works of art, which the Japanese government agrees to replenish from time to time. It is estimated that the 35 railroads which enter Chicago have expended $1 million in equipment and facilities for transporting World's Fair visitors and freight. The Fine Arts Building has a mosaic floor, the contract for which was let at $16,989. Again, another interesting point. We now have 2 indications of mosaic floors. Now, this doesn't indicate that the entire floor of the building was mosaic or done in mosaic, but it is indeed an interesting point to consider. An Indiana stone quarry company exhibits a life-size figure of an elephant chiseled out of a solid block of stone. It is 11 feet high and weighs 30 tons. We did discuss this in an earlier episode. Moving on to the next section here, and it will certainly be a clean slate, reading some various sections on hygiene and sanitation, starting from the top. It will readily be conceded that all of the exhibits set forth in the World's Fair at Chicago, there is no department which bears so directly upon human good and human happiness as its great and important department of hygiene and sanitation. The prosperity of a nation consists not so much in its wealth as in the health, happiness, and efficiency of its workers, so that any improvement and development of life conditions may well be regarded as the storing of a national reserve fund which is incomparably more valuable, far and wide-reaching in its results than a mere surplus of revenue. And it has been found that sanitation and wholesome surroundings by their effect upon the physique and productive capacity of the individuals affected add substantially to the working value of a population. The relation between health and wealth is absolute and infallible. The Pennsylvania State Board of Health, in its plans of improved tenement houses, shows that the artisan need no longer struggle for the birthright of every human being, the opportunity of a decent habitation, some degree of privacy, fresh air, light, and sunshine, for such are here provided to be within his reach. A great advance is shown in the construction of these artisan dwellings, which are excellent examples of modern sanitation. With plans such as these to hand, it will soon be counted a national disgrace that any country should permit its toilers, its hewers of wood and drawers of water, to crowd together in dark, unwholesome rabbit hutches, instead of advancing into the light of day and taking their just share of the benefits of 19th century science. A moderate rental provides not only the proper number of rooms, but also affords the luxury of a flower bed and a playground for the children. To supply the needs of a more prosperous class, we have a model working man's house built on behalf of the Philadelphia County Women's Committee. And almost side by side with the Cliff Dwellers exhibit, we find a working man's cottage. What a contrast the two present. What an evolution in thought and human need is shown. The Illinois State Board of Health exhibits tables and diagrams illustrative of the zymotic diseases prevalent in Chicago during the years 1891, 1892, and 1893. These are the years of the construction, let's remember. It points to the causes and suggests the remedies. The investigation was begun in the winter of 1891-92 during an epidemic of enteric fever in the city of Chicago, an epidemic which caused considerable anxiety and was productive of much ominous prophecy regarding the amount of disease likely to be experienced during the World's Fair of 1893. There is no doubt but that the public attention then called to the health conditions of the city has prevented many foreigners from visiting the exhibition. Fortunately, the loudly predicted outbreaks of typhoid and cholera, consequent on the ingress of so many strangers and their inevitable overcrowding, have proved themselves to have been baseless. Contrary to all expectation, the health of the city has been exceptionally good, and the sanitary arrangements and general hygienic standard have been in marked contrast to the condition of affairs which obtained in Philadelphia during the centennial. Again, another jab at another exposition, this time Philadelphia. Usually it's Paris. The sanitation of the White City itself was an important subject and has been most satisfactorily dealt with. In the artistic setting of the grounds, in the lagoons with their picturesque gondolas and gondoliers, we have more than the beauties of old Venice, and we find them combined with health. In most of the old towns of Europe, the picturesque and the unhealthy are indissolubly combined. Chicago has shown that art and hygiene may go hand in hand. The sanitation of the fair and the provisions made for public health and comfort are beyond all praise. A pure water supply was ensured by the establishment all over the grounds of sterilized water tanks, from which the public might drink without suspicion and without harm. The system of purification by chemical precipitation has been applied to the sewage of Jackson Park with very encouraging results. In Class 829, Group 147, Germany is much to be commended for her excellent plans of public buildings, constructed on lines essentially adapted to health and comfort. In her models of sanitaries for children, drawings of hospitals and insane asylums, construction, lighting, heating, and ventilating of the German parliaments, schools, town hall, etc., she reaches the highest standard of hygienic architecture. These designs for hospitals and asylums are models for the world. The McLean Hospital for the Treatment of the Insane is also an excellent type of such an asylum. This was one of the first institutions which established a school for training nurses in work among the insane. A valuable step in the right direction. The scheme of the treatment laid down is admirable. Gymnastics, billiards, and various recreations, indoor and out, are established with good results, every effort being made to bring the patients under refined and home-like influence, such as must lighten the miseries, if not materially bettering the mental condition. The establishment of hospital substations in convenient parts of the grounds for the reception and treatment of patients was shown from the number of cases dealt with to be a necessary, wise, and humane provision on the part of the authorities. Some thousands of patients were admitted and treated in the emergency hospital during the 6 months of the fair. And do remember, we did see some pictures of these hospitals in earlier episodes. The relation between health and wealth is absolute and infallible. A powerful statement. Is this still the case in the country in which you reside today? Do you feel that your health is valued and that your well-being is paramount? Consider the largest health crisis that just transpired in recent history. Have you seen, in the aftermath of this event, the bolstering of healthcare programs, initiatives, and institutions? Did the billions upon billions funnel back into the public sector, increasing wages, health education, or anything of the like, ensuring that the health, happiness, and efficiency of the populace would not let such an event transpire again? Or did those pesky dollars end up in some very large corporate and private entities or conglomerates? Let's check back in with a few more sites and exhibits worth seeing at the event. Germany's building costs about $125,000 and is a combination of typical styles of German architecture, such as are seen in perfection in Nuremberg. It is massive in construction, the first story of great blocks of sandstone, and the second of a combination of brick and cement. At one end is erected a Gothic cathedral, the windows of which show exceedingly artistic effects, being the work of several of the most famous designers in Germany. Since 1864, Illinois women have taken out 284 patents for inventions and devices of one kind and another. The Illinois World's Fair Board exhibits copies of all of these patents and models of all of the inventions that could be obtained. The Austrian woodcarving industry is specially represented at the exposition by 34 expert woodcarvers from Vienna, who exhibit their work in its various branches. Kudos on the writing. Good one. Unique among the other exhibits is that made by the United States Naval Department. It is in a structure which, to all outward appearances, is a faithful, full-sized model of one of the new coastline battleships. This imitation battleship of 1893 is erected on piling on the lakefront in the northeast portion of Jackson Park. It is surrounded by water and has the appearance of being moored to a wharf. The structure has all of the fittings that belong to the actual ship, such as guns, turrets, torpedo tubes, torpedo nets, and booms, with boats, anchors, chain cables, davits, awning, deck fittings, etc., together with the appliances for working the same. Officers, seamen, mechanics, and Marines are detailed by the Navy Department during the exposition, and the discipline and mode of life on our naval vessels are completely shown. The detail of men is not, however, as great as the completement of the actual ship. The crew gives certain drills, especially boat, torpedo, and gun drills, as in a vessel of war. The objects of historical value and interest which are shown at the fair are legion. It is safe to say that the collection is 10 times as numerous as has ever been witnessed in one place before. The Columbus relics alone are very great in number and include the majority of the important portable reminders of the famous explorer. They were brought from Spain, Italy, Rome, the West Indies, and other widely separated parts of the earth. Every department, almost, of the Great Exposition has its relics on view: old records, portraits, machines, models, inventions, etc., each having historical interest, or marking a stage of progress in its own line. Particularly numerous are these historical exhibits from the United States. Almost every state contributes to the number something which will be viewed with interest because of its history or associations. One of the best contributions is shown by Pennsylvania, the collection being furnished mainly from Philadelphia under the auspices of a committee of its city council. Among the objects in this collection are the following: the chair occupied by Thomas Jefferson when writing the Declaration of Independence, the table on which it was signed, the silver inkstand used on that occasion, Thomas Jefferson's sword, chair of memorial woods, including parts of Columbus's house in Spain, bell rung at Valley Forge when Washington occupied that place with his army, sofa belonging to George Washington and used by him when he lived in Philadelphia, bench made from pew in Old Christ Church occupied by Washington and Lafayette, punch bowl used by General Washington and other officers of the Revolutionary Army, baby clothes made by Mrs. John Adams for her son John Quincy Adams, ale mug that belonged to John Paul Jones, Peel's portrait of Washington, the first ever painted, first lightning rod invented by Ben Franklin, electrical machine invented by Franklin, original model of John Fitch's steamboat, which ran between Philadelphia and Burlington from 1787 to 1790, unsigned copy of the Declaration of Independence, fans used by Franklin at the court of France when he was a minister there, cast of Washington's face taken during life from original mold used for Houdon's statue, clocks of Benjamin Franklin, William Penn and Oliver Cromwell, running and keeping good time, Gilbert Stuart's portrait of Washington, Thomas Jefferson's thermometer, lock of Jefferson's hair, Pocahontas's necklace, surveying instrument used by William Penn in laying out the city of Philadelphia, and the famous Liberty Bell. Now, speaking of older artifacts and relics, we are going to check in with the archaeological exhibits of Central America and Mexico. We read from the beginning. A notable feature of the world's Columbian Exposition has been the unprecedented assemblage of valuable and new archaeological material from Central American ruins. Never before has there been such a fine and extensive exhibit of exact reproductions, plaster casts, and photographs of the prehistoric monuments of Yucatan, Honduras, and Guatemala. To fully appreciate the value of these, it is necessary to realize, in the first instance, that they represent the highest development attained by the inhabitants of America previous to its discovery in the arts of architecture, sculpture, ornamentation, and writing. These relics of a bygone civilization are disappearing with alarming rapidity, for year by year the trees, shrubs, and plants that covered the masses of ruined buildings send out new shoots and roots that loosen the blocks of stone, and torrents of tropical rain carry the loosened fragments away. To compare Catherwood's drawings of the principal edifices of Uxmal and Labna with recent photographs is to realize the deplorable fact that within the next 30 years, many of the finest sculptured facades now standing will be a shapeless mass of ruins. Efforts to save these from utter oblivion by means of photographs and reproductions cannot therefore be overestimated, especially as explorations in these regions entail great risks, difficulties, and sacrifices. The majority of these ruins are in inaccessible or malarious districts. The molds of the great monolithic stelas and altars of Copan, obtained by Messrs. Owens and Seville in the Honduras expedition conducted by the Peabody Museum, had to be transported to the coast on muleback, the journey requiring a week. In the performance of this admirable work, Mr. Owens lost his life through fever in the beginning of this year. In the center of the anthropological building stands an impressive group formed by the casts of a number of the carved stelas and altars of Copan, while on the walls of the aisles are mainly exact and interesting reproductions of fragments of architectural ornamentations and inscription. This striking exhibit has been the means of awakening much interest in American archaeology, the majority of people visiting the exposition being totally unaware of the existence of such imposing prehistoric monuments on the American continent. I'm just going to read that section one more time. I think this is quite potent here. This sentence. This striking exhibit has been the means of awakening much interest in American archaeology, the majority of people visiting the exposition being totally unaware of the existence of such imposing prehistoric monuments on the American continent. There is no doubt but that the majority of Aboriginal sculpture was brilliantly colored, and as color in itself was such an important factor in native pictography, it is a discouraging thought that its obliteration on existing monuments may debar us forever from deciphering these thoroughly. In the open air in front of the anthropological building, a noble group of ruins, tastefully surrounded and covered with appropriate plants, was set up in exact reproduction of the portions of the highly ornamented facades of such notable edifices as the House of Nuns, House of the Governor, Serpent House at Uxmal, and the portal of a temple at Labna. These were made from molds taken by Mr. J.J. Thompson, United States Consul at Mérida, Yucatan. The Royal Museum of Berlin contributed 8 fine casts of the celebrated bas-reliefs discovered at Santa Lucia, Casa Malhuapa, Guatemala. In the Guatemala State Building, an extremely interesting set of casts was exhibited from the newly discovered ruins of, bear with me, Saxton Quiqui or Quiqui in the province of Patan near the Mexican frontier. It is a satisfaction to report upon still more new and important archaeological researches in Guatemala. Mr. Manuel L. Guetta of Totonicapan has recently discovered extensive ruins at Calcatan, Pueblo Viejo, and Pichiquil in the province of Huehuetenango, and exhibits the interesting results of his excavations there. My apologies for butchering all those names. They consist of stone ornaments and implements, and of pottery, some vessels being painted with figures and calculiform hieroglyphs. Although the collection is not a very large one, it is of particular importance, as strangely enough such relics are but rarely found in Central American ruins. This circumstance has led to the supposition that many of these ruined cities were abandoned at one time by their inhabitants, who carried away all their portable possessions. Had the Mexican government been able to carry out its original generous intention, its archaeological exhibit at the Columbian Exposition would have been one of the finest and most important there. The Republic of Costa Rica contributed an admirable archaeological and ethnological exhibit. The exhibit was completely representative, containing a large number of fine and rare specimens, which were carefully classified and catalogued, and most tastefully and artistically displayed. Special mention should be made of the fine paintings and maps that decorated the walls of the Costa Rica court, and the valuable publications of Mr. Peralta, which were exhibited. To summarize, the Columbian Exposition marks an important era in Central American archaeology, for it has brought together and placed before the public the finest and most complete collection of casts, reproductions, and photographs of the ruins of Central America that has ever been assembled. It is to be hoped that by awakening popular interest in the grand prehistoric ruins of Central America, a fresh impulse may be given to archaeological research in the United States, leading to further exploration and still greater results. For though we cannot arrest the hand of time as it slowly levels the great ruined temples and cities, we can earn the gratitude of posterity by preserving lasting records of their existence and appearance in this century. An excellent array of American archaeological wonders indeed. Let's take a detour from the ancient landscapes into the depths of the water to explore a brand new exhibit showcased within the Fisheries building. Taking this account from the publication, The Book of the Fair, it is again a first of its kind displayed at the Columbian Exposition. Here was the live Fisheries exhibit. From the rotunda, one side of the largest series of aquaria could be examined. These were 10 in number, each having a capacity of 7,000 to 27,000 gallons of water. Passing out of the rotunda along a corridor 15 feet wide could be seen on one hand the opposite side of a series of huge tanks, and on the other, smaller tanks from 750 to 1,500 gallons capacity. The glass fronts of the aquaria were about 575 feet long, having 3,000 square feet of surface. Their total water capacity, exclusive of reservoirs, was 140,000 gallons, 40,000 of which was devoted to the marine exhibit. The entire saltwater circulation included about 70,000 gallons. The government aquaria, in a circular annex 100 feet in diameter, were covered into picturesque arrangements of water and rock, where live fish freely swam about, having soon accustomed themselves to their congenial surroundings. A row of aquaria lined the outer walls, the space being broken only at the doors. The effect as one passed through the aisle was that of walking on the bottom of a lake, whose waters were held in check by heavy plate glass. The inner row, 12 feet wide, contained a big aquarium that held all varieties of fish found in the Mississippi River and its tributaries: catfish, sturgeon, and pickerel of enormous size and weight. From the Great Lakes were 100 varieties: whitefish, trout, perch, etc., and many invertebrates. A series of aquaria along the south aisle displayed many varieties of trout and salmon. An aquarium near the west door of the annex was bright with colors of anemones in grottos and their food, algae, besides starfish and sea urchins. This tank was aerated by a contrivance that forced the air through the bottom in small bubbles. In other saltwater tanks could also be seen all known fish specimens from the Gulf of Mexico and the Atlantic and Pacific Oceans. Their average depth was 5 feet and length 6 to 60 feet. Calcareous tufa, a limestone formation found in springs in northern Ohio, was liberally used in making the decorative submerged arches, grottos, reefs, and mountains, while vegetable matter coated with limestone was wrought into rough, fantastic designs. Aquatic plants grew in holes and crannies where black earth had been deposited. 2/3 the aquaria space was reserved for freshwater fish, the remainder for natives of the sea. From here, we are diving into the publication The History of the World's Fair to explore a couple of notable wonders of this event, starting it off with the statuary that was created and displayed for the event. As this next passage explores the various and numerous symbolic statues that were present around the grounds, we won't go over every detail, yet encourage anyone interested to check this book out for yourself, as this statuary rivaled that of what has been coined the Old World and cities of renown. In the zenith of its achievements, Venice was never so statuesque as Jackson Park, nor Rome, nor Athens in their haughtiest epochs could point to so many inspiring effigies. Never before did distance lend so much enchantment to the view. The above seem like marble but are only plaster and scantling. Indeed, so exquisite and matchless has been the handiwork, that were the group's marble instead of imitation, they would far surpass in originality, conception of symmetry, and grace. Del Sartine principles, strength, beauty, and character, many of the recognized masterpieces of the chiseler's skill found in European collections. But here it might be well to say something of the material of which they are constructed, the new and wonderful staff, in quotations I might add. This, I believe, was first used in facing buildings of the last Paris Exposition, and was considered at the time particularly beautiful. It has the properties of both common plaster and cement, and can be worked into any required design. In hardening, it shows an ivory-like surface, which, however, can be colored in any desired tint. Thus, the most ornate architectural effects are produced, and all the buildings being covered with this decorative substance present the appearance of veritable marble palaces. For the designs, etc., it is molded into plates, the required size, and joined invisibly, and it is estimated that about 500,000 of these pieces have been used on the large buildings alone, Many of the state buildings are of staff and ornamented with sculpture of the highest order. Horticultural building, mines and mining, transportation, women's building, and fisheries are all much enlivened with splendid staff statuary, and also the McMoney's Fountain, the Statue of the Republic, the Neptune columns, the peristyle, the statue of Franklin, and the bears, lions, etc. that guard the 16 bridges spanning the lagoons. Now, there is a minor detail to draw attention to, and that is the Statue of the Republic. This may be a small detail, or possibly even an error, yet why is this displayed in lowercase while other prominent statues, fountains, and figures of mythology are capitalized? This was one of, if not a defining wonder at this event. The Statue of the Republic was considered the largest ever made in America up to this time in history, a female personification that represented America herself, with strength and the Republican form of government. Standing 65 feet within the central basin and constructed of staff, which was placed over a wooden and steel framework, she presented the visitors with various symbolism, arms extended above her laurel-wreathed head. In her right hand, she showcased a globe upon which perched an eagle, or what is represented as an eagle, with its outstretched wings. Now, we did explore some phoenix iconography in the branding episode, so this bird represented here potentially could be either. Her left hand raised a staff which was adorned with a Liberty or Phrygian cap. In some instances, such as this picture from the Book of the Fair, this statue was even referred to as the Statue of Liberty. So we have this mixture of representations. Is this the Statue of the Republic? Is it Columbia personified? Is it the Statue of Liberty? Perhaps it is all. There was also a Statue of Liberty situated on the administration building who was also holding a staff in the left hand. Her right hand is rested upon potentially a cherub who is raising what appears to be a torch of flame, quite similar to the Statue of Liberty in New York. She is wearing the Liberty cap and a little more revealing than her counterpart in the Central Basin. We also see the American phoenix, or eagle rather, gazing upwards. One small note to add is that a replica stands in Jackson Park today of this statue. The original was set ablaze intentionally in 1896. A replica implying that it may be similar in stature yet exact in its replication. However, this current figure in Jackson Park has a different element adorning the top of the staff. A quick search provided some info that this is a plaque that simply says Liberty. The original symbol has been replaced completely. Therefore, it isn't really a true replica. And why would the symbol of the Phrygian or Liberty cap be removed? Would this invite questions to later generations? Understandably, this may be a minor and insignificant change, and it is technically representing a similar idea. Yet, what if small changes like this have been happening for various symbols and iconography for countless years throughout history? Even a small change to a certain symbol can have massive ramifications with how it is perceived. For example, reversing directions on a compass, changing directions on a road sign, changing a stop sign to a triangle. Suppose that's one for you to decide. Let's explore some additional sites and then explore the wonder of the peristyle in more detail. The Kansas State Normal School, which has 1,500 pupils and is the largest in the West, makes an exhibit at the fair. Some very interesting exhibits of photography have been sent to the exposition from Sydney, New South Wales. The collection was prepared by the government printing office and consists of some 400 views measuring 40 by 30 inches. Some of these pictures, arranged in panoramic order, measure 40 feet in length. An enlarged view of the moon from a negative taken by Mr. Russell, the government astronomer at the observatory, is one of the gems of the collection. The largest sample of gold quartz ever mined in Montana was taken out of the McIntyre lode. Its weight is 1,785 pounds. It came from near the surface. There are other large samples which came from the Schaefer shaft at the depth of 110 feet, one from the Musser shaft 100 feet, and another from the working shaft 200 feet. All are on exhibition at the fair. Miss Ada Rehan is regarded as one of the best actresses in America. She has played abroad with great success and is now further honored by the people of Montana, for they have appropriated $300,000 worth of silver for a heroic-sized statue of the lady, and she is modeled in this precious metal as the Statue of Justice and exhibited at the World's Fair. Miss Rehan is said to possess more largely than any other available living model the qualities desirable in a typical American woman and a model of justice, symmetry of form, dignity of mind, with a head not only majestic in pose but indicative of intellectual strength. As we continue on through these various exhibits and wonders, it may be asked how one could traverse such an expanse of several hundred acres. We begin with a unique mode of transport that extended into Lake Michigan and provided visitors landing via the water: a movable sidewalk. This curious structure extends the full length of the pier and, when crowded with people, presents a very interesting spectacle. It will accommodate 5,610 persons, who are carried along at various speed. Part of the walk moves at the rate of 3 miles an hour, and the remainder at 6 miles. 315 cars support the structure, making a chain 4,300 feet long. The propelling power is formed by 10 streetcar motors, and the wire and trolleys are concealed beneath the platform, so that we move along little suspecting the power that impels us. This pier is large enough to hold about 40,000 persons, and has few equals in length in the world. Its construction was commenced on September 1892, and it required over 3 months to finish it. It covers over 13 acres of ground, a vast amount of timber, 6,500 cords of stone, and 151 tons of iron were used in its construction. There are 2 or 3 other curious methods of locomotion at the fair. On the Midway Plaisance, we see the sliding railway, an elevated structure, the rails of which are broad and flat on top. There are no wheels, so the car is supported on iron shoes, hollowed out and resting upon the rail. The water is fed into the hollow of the shoe and escapes by pressure between the rails. The ice railway is another curiosity in this line. At first sight, it looks like a great toboggan slide. It occupies a space 60 by 400 feet. Real ice and snow lie between the tracks. It is made by the refrigerating machinery of a great New York concern. The total length of the tracks is 875 feet. The sleighs glide merrily along, filled with happy people whose laughter mingles with the jingling of the bells. Everywhere there is motion: electric launches, gondolas, the intramural railway, the sliding railway, the ice railway, and the movable sidewalk. Land and water alike are alive with happy people. While we have explored many exhibits and wonders, how could we not explore the mammoth in the room? This next passage, coming from the History of the World's Fair, and describes perhaps the object the most eagerly sought for by a majority of sightseers, is the mammoth structure known as the Manufacturers and Liberal Arts Building, or by a shorter term, the Manufacturers Building. This is because it is the largest in the group of most extraordinary buildings. and also because of the extensive distribution of countries, which makes exhibits and the generally diversified and interesting nature of the exhibits. The manufacturer's building is the largest in the world and the largest under roof ever constructed. Its dimensions are 1,687 by 787 feet, and it has an exhibit area of 44 acres and covers 30.5 acres. A central hall 380 feet wide runs its complete length and is spanned by single arches, without supports. 12 million pounds of steel were used in these 22 trusses, each of which weighs 125 tons, and it required 600 flat cars to bring them from the ironworks to Chicago. There were 17 million feet of lumber used in the construction, and with this, 5 carloads of nails were used. While there are over 2 million pounds of iron in roof of nave, there are 11 acres of skylight and 40 carloads of glass in the roof. The building is 100 feet longer than the Brooklyn Bridge, and it is claimed that the iron and steel in the roof alone would construct 2 such suspension bridges. It will seat 300,000 people, and there will be room for the full standing army of Russia under its roof. It is 3 times as large as St. Peter's Cathedral, and the largest church in Chicago could be placed within the vestibule of that great church at Rome. It is in the Corinthian style of architecture, its classic outlines and stupendous length being broken by the 4 entrances, 40 feet wide and 80 feet high, and the 8 domes. The exterior is covered with staff, and its columns, arches, sculptured bas-reliefs, and panels presents the appearance of a magnificent marble palace. When one enters the manufacturer's building, say by the south entrance, his impression will be that he is in fairyland, or at least that he is visiting a city of palaces, temples, castles, arches, monuments, and hanging gardens. The great central landmark, looking like the spire of a cathedral in alabaster, is the clock tower, 135 feet high, of the American Self-Winding Clock Company. It is arched on all 4 sides, of course, or it would block up the thoroughfare. In addition to a clock dial on each side, it has a chime of 9 bells. The largest on which the hour is struck weighs 3,700 pounds, and the whole chime 7,000 pounds. When they ring, it sounds like the music of heaven reverberating through the immense spaces of the building. Clocks are scarce in Jackson Park, but the visitors of the manufacturer's building, no matter in what remote corner of it they may be hid, are reminded in notes of the sweetest music, of the flight, not only of the happy hours, but of the happy halves and quarters as well. And while this section within the publication goes into great detail regarding all the incredible exhibits on display, we must check back into Shepp's photographs to explore a wonder within a wonder, so to speak. We find one of those wonders of human ingenuity, which in this age of wonders might be passed without the attention it deserves: the Otis elevator. It should be remembered that the building in which this elevator is placed is the largest in the world, that it covers with its floors an area of 44 acres, and that it contains such a bewildering profusion of human handiwork as man never before saw. Multitudes pass through the building daily, and so great is the attraction on the lower floor that few would ever go into the galleries were it not for the Otis elevator. There are 30 great staircases which give access to one gallery 50 feet wide and to 86 of smaller dimensions, projecting from this. The staircases are 12 feet wide, and the view to be obtained from the galleries is of surpassing interest, yet few care for this, desiring only to gain a view of the vast panorama of Jackson Park, its beautiful buildings and silvery ribbons of gleaming water, alive with gondolas and electric launches. To reach the roof of this great building, we must use the electric elevator, which ascends 220 feet in 1 minute of time. Yet the motion is so easy that no one could possibly be inconvenienced by the speed. There are 4 cars in the shaft, each capable of containing 15 persons, so that 60 people may ascend at once to view the charming scene. The terraces upon the roof afford ample accommodation for a large number of people. One can easily get a comfortable seat, and from this glorious vantage point view the wondrous scene below. We can see far out onto the lake, and the southern portion of the city of Chicago lies unveiled before us. There can be no stranger sensation than this. Beneath us, a gathered world displays its myriad wares. All that genius and skill could accomplish since the world began are here. Around us rise such marvels of architecture as the world never before saw, with the quivering lake making a silvery frame for the entire picture. We are not quite done, and understand this is a lengthy episode. There's one more main element to view and explore. Afterwards will be an honorable mention of sorts within the city of Chicago, which has a direct relation to past explorations within this series. So let's venture back into the Central Basin. The Court of Honor was the central attraction of beauty and admiration, both in design and scale, providing visitors a view of almost all the notable buildings at the exposition. The entrance from the water would have been one of absolute spectacular fashion, as you arrive through the peristyle and enter through its columned splendor. Indeed, the portals of the world's Columbian Exposition look out on the blue waters of Lake Michigan. A Greek peristyle, white and colossal, faces the waves which less than a century ago bore the canoe of the Indian, the boat of the adventurous trader. What if this stately portico had flashed on the vision of Marquette or La Salle when they sailed along these shores in the 17th century, each the Columbus of our inland seas? Either would have thought that solitude had made him mad. What if this columned splendor had broken on the dying gaze of those first settlers of Chicago, who only 80 years ago were massacred on these very sands by savages? Those martyrs of civilization would have accepted such a glimpse as the threshold of the mystical city of the soul. On a ruder and a wider sea that this tossed the caravels of the Genoan sailor 400 years ago. In the dreams that mocked this world finder in his hours of sleep, was there not a forecast of the great white temple of humanity which the distant future would erect to the glory of his name? Surely this vision of the future was given to encourage him in the dark hours of his voyage, or at least to solace him in chains. Let us look at this peristyle and its surroundings. Nothing like it has ever been seen or attempted. It is grand and impressive, commanding and beautiful. The peristyle is 600 feet long, 60 feet wide, and 60 feet high. At its center is a grand archway, forming a portal from Lake Michigan to the Grand Central Court. This portal is dedicated to Columbus and is inscribed with the names of the world's great explorers. Crowning it is a group of statuary, emblematic of the progress of the world. The peristyle bears 48 columns, representing the states and territories. A truly unique and monumental wonder of the exhibition indeed. The description of this monument being seen by various explorers on the shores from a distance while sailing by would have been remarkable and an unparalleled view, leaving the viewer feeling mad as if the sight of such greatness would be an illusion. These remarks were interesting and could be chalked up to creative writing, yet there are so many various theories that revolve around this event, many of them entertaining, and some more possible than others. However, there is an unusual understanding of why buildings of this caliber may cause issues. Its mere existence and presence may stir an inquisitive mind. They serve as a reminder of what has come before, becoming a contrast themselves. Whether they represent an unknown or mysterious period within our past, they are still arguably of a past time, with a different state of mind. That in itself could be considered mysterious, especially since this type of architectural abundance is overly opulent. Is it the vague remembering that strikes a certain chord? That there is a murky remembrance of when architecture mirrored a more natural form, a more beautiful aspect of creativity? And where has this gone? A question that continually gets raised is whether this type of architecture is beyond our capability today, showcasing the contrast of what is built today compared to buildings that were presented at this very exposition and in every corner of the world. This idea of inability is a substantial claim, bearing significant weight, yet it is thrown around like feathers. A more personal perspective here, it is borderline insulting to the creative genius that is embedded in the human spirit. As someone who has seen and worked with individuals with uncapped creativity, potential, and imagination, impossibility is simply not in the lexicon. We may be more likely confined within a systematic and rigid societal framework that promotes mediocrity and expedience rather than function and overall beauty, receiving more money, currency, or energy from completing projects in quantity over quality, even though beauty could in itself be considered a function. Of course, there will always be exceptions, and maybe the largest difference is that the exceptions of our current period were the normal standards for the past. Because when projects are proposed that actually involve talented craftsmen and teams of people with a passion to create something beautiful, structures such as the second largest Hindu temple outside of India are constructed within our modern era. Taking 12 years with a workforce of roughly 12,000, the Akshardham Temple was built in New Jersey, potentially the largest hand-carved temple within the United States itself. And yes, that was hand-carved. The entire site covers an area of 183 acres and includes 13 shrines. The workforce were guided by skilled artisans from India and molded 4 types of stone for this project: pink sandstone, marble, granite, and limestone. A truly remarkable and astounding architectural wonder completed by an organization geared towards preserving traditions and beauty. Imagine if entire cities, counties, states, countries, or nations were geared towards this type of societal project and progress. And isn't that thought interesting if it is applied to the expositions? Are we gazing at an event that harnessed the complete and ultimate power of the nation to complete this task? This in itself would almost seem foreign, as this type of project and collective cooperation seems to be rare in our modern era. Yet that is another one for you to decipher. However, we have one more wonder to browse. It is relevant to this exploration as its presence has been unknowingly shown in previous episodes. These mysterious images within the Ryerson and Burnham archives proved to be somewhat anomalous at the time. With some more research and a number of books later, it seems quite likely that these images represented the Chicago Drainage Canal, considered one of the world's greatest engineering feats, at least in the writings of American publications. The most unusual part about these mysterious images is how they could not have been labeled as such. Considering Chicago's constant battle with sewage disposal throughout the 19th century, almost since the inception of Chicago itself, for we have some serious achievements to mention. We're going to start by taking some initial notes from a real thriller of a publication here. It is called A Report to the Chicago Real Estate Board on the Disposal of the Sewage and Protection of the Water Supply of Chicago. Let's take a look at the early attempts at sewerage, which were based upon principles which were later found to be incorrect. The ground was low and flat, and the inexperience of the day suggested that the streets be dug down and an attempt made to carry off the surface water in sluices. Next, an attempt was made to lay pavements and sewers upon the natural surface of the ground and allow the sewage to run off in the gutters. By 1850, when the population was about 28,000, many of the populous localities were described as noisome quagmires, the gutters running with filth or clogged up, forming stagnant pools of indescribable liquid. A quick note here regarding the population growing rapidly over 2 years from 1853 to 1855, and increasing in population by 20,000. It does raise the question of how the infrastructure, housing, and general civic services kept up with this drastic increase. Let's keep reading. The ground was unfavorable for sewerage. In the vicinity of the north and south branches of the Chicago River, the surface was only 3 or 4 feet above the level of the lake, and to the westward, near the mouth of the river, it was not more than 10 or 12 feet above it. To a considerable extent, it was necessary to raise the grade of the streets to keep the sewers underground. After much discussion, it was decided to raise the grade of the city to a height of 10 feet above the lake on the streets adjacent to the river, and so permit of the construction of cellars 7 or 8 feet deep for the houses. So around this time frame of the mid-19th century, we have this incredible feat of raising various buildings or entire blocks of Chicago to accommodate for the sewage system. Let's go through a few articles to illustrate this feat before moving into the drainage canal. Initially, we have an article from the Press and Tribune in Chicago in 1859, where we had a call yesterday from A.W. Stratton of the firm of Lane and Stratton of San Francisco, California. He explained to us the principles by which this firm have been engaged in raising buildings in San Francisco by hydraulic power. The firm have shipped their machinery for this city, being Chicago, where it will arrive in a few months. Mr. Stratton is satisfied that his plans of raising buildings is cheaper and more effective than any other, and that he can compete or complete successfully with the modes now in use in this city. We take the following from the San Francisco Times. In raising the exchange, not a wall has cracked, nor has there been the least warping of the door sills or other parts of the woodwork. So silently and beautifully has the machinery done its work, that an occupant might have remained in ignorance that the raising was going on from any jarring or other indication of motion. Indeed, any breaks created in the walls of a building by its settling after being erected are remedied by the restoration of the edifice to its original exact level, thus closing up any cracks which may have existed. This hydraulic machinery has been in use in this city since 1853, and some 30 buildings have been raised with it to grade. No accident has ever yet occurred, nor does it seem probable. The absolute perfection of these tasks is something that seems to continually be present. Again, is this merely creative writing for the paper to boastfully present these companies and American engineering? Or did this endeavor happen so flawlessly that no wall cracked, no door frame was warped? It was completed so silently that an occupant may be unaware that their entire building was being lifted and repositioned. Let's read a section from the Cleveland Morning Leader in 1860, where it outlines the entire front of the first-class buildings on the north side of Lake Street between LaSalle and Clark Streets is now rising to grade at the rate of about 12 inches per day. It will be at its full height by tomorrow night, when it will constitute a spectacle not many of our citizens may see again, if ever. A business block covering nearly 1 acre and weighing over 25,000 tons, resting on 6,000 screws, upon which it has made an upward journey of 4 feet and 10 inches. Probably its parallel enterprise cannot be found the world over. Now, back to the Press and Tribune in Chicago for our next article, which was published in, again, 1860, where we read that a most notable improvement is in progress on the best business portion of Lake Street, where under contracts taken separately but being conjointly performed by several firms, the Marine Bank building, which is of Athens marble and 5 stories high, is being raised to grade, together with all the stores of the 4-story brick blocks adjoining on the east. This is the heaviest undertaking of its class ever attempted in this city. The entire front extending on the north side of Lake Street, from Clark to LaSalle Street, is to be raised to grade at once. This row contains some of the heaviest buildings in the city, and the task will be one of no ordinary proportions. During all the time of its performance, the business of the numerous stores and offices will be but slightly interfered with. The cost of raising the entire block to grade will be about $10,000, exclusive of the masonry required. Messrs. Carter and Bauer architects superintend the entire work. And the basements under the whole will be of the first class. The entire block will be 4 stories high with basement, the front to be of pressed brick with stone window caps, sills, and cornice. The lower story will have an ornamental iron front with patent rolling shutters. The whole is to be fitted up in first-class style. Messrs. Carter and Bauer are the architects. The contract for the mason work has been taken by Messrs. Walbom and Bowman, and the carpenter work by Boggs and Son. Our last article for this section is again from the Press and Tribune in Chicago, 1960, discussing when Chicago shall have been for a decade or more of years up to grade, it will come to be a marvel and a doubt in many minds that the wonder was ever accomplished of raising to grade the entire front of 320 feet at one and the same time, and that of first-class buildings filled with tenants, stores, and offices. But Messrs. Brown and Hollingsworth, Pullman and Moore, and Ellie and Smith, the contracting firms between whom this work was accomplished, have wisely chosen to perpetuate the memory of their feat in a beautiful lithograph from the lithograph establishment of Edward Mendel, number 162 Lake Street. It was well and honorably done for Chicago, both the work itself and its perpetuation. After the raising of Chicago, there were still issues with the drainage of sewage. It became such an issue that we have a statement in the previous publication that needs to be highlighted. In the year 1880, a proposition was amplified and urged as a public necessity, which should receive the attention of a commission of experts to be created for the purpose of devising a comprehensive system for disposing of the sewage of the city and putting a stop, for all time, to the insanitary conditions which then existed. The South Fork was declared to be in an abominable condition of filth beyond the power of pen to describe. What a ruthless verbal smackdown of the South Fork, and clearly it needed to be dealt with, as it was beyond the power of pen to describe. This leads to our final wonder of this presentation, the Chicago Drainage Canal, and luckily we have souvenir booklets documenting this incredible process, and would encourage anyone interested to check some of them out. They will be linked below in the description. Let's dig into it. The greatest of its kind in the world in point of skillful engineering, magnitude, and manner of construction, was created for the double purpose of giving sanitary drainage to the city of Chicago, and ultimately forming a ship canal connecting the Great Lakes with the Gulf of Mexico through the Illinois and Mississippi rivers. By an act of the Illinois legislature in 1889, the officials necessary for promoting the construction were first elected by popular vote in the city of Chicago in 1890, with power to levy and collect taxes from the people of Cook County directly benefited by such improvement. The object to be accomplished was the entire reversal of the Chicago River current by diversion of the city sewage from the lake into the ancient waterway of the Des Plaines River, and thus preserving the city's water from constant pollution. The controlling works, a triumph of modern engineering, were built for the sole object of regulating the flow of the lake water into the Des Plaines River, and are so constructed as to meet possible fluctuations in Lake Michigan from 5 feet above to 8 feet below its average level. They consist of 7 20 by 30 foot metal sluice gates with necessary mason work, and a 160 foot bear trap dam. Dimensions sufficiently large to not only control the present flow of 300,000 cubic feet a minute, but capable of meeting all future requirements. An additional difficulty to overcome was the diversion of the Des Plaines River by the construction of 13 miles of new channel and 19 miles of levee to control the water of the Des Plaines watershed. At the head of this river diversion, it was necessary to make a safety valve in the shape of a 397-foot concrete dam called the spillway, over which there is no flow of water until the volume reaches 300,000 cubic feet a minute. The bridges built on the main channel are 6 for public highways and 7 for railroads, all of which are movable and thoroughly modern structures, and represent a combined weight in iron and steel of 22,678,000 pounds. Contracts were let for the excavating in sections, and various interesting and novel methods of carrying out these contracts were made use of. The grand total of 43,478,659 cubic yards of earth and rock being removed. Quite exact. The first work on the canal was begun just below Lamont on Shovel Day, September 3rd, 1892. So remember, September 3rd, 1892. This is mere months before the opening of the Columbian Exposition in May of 1893, while construction is still going on. And the first water turned into the canal January 2nd, 1900. The total expenditures, including $3.5 million interest charges to January 1st, 1900, were $33,525,691.20, $24 million of which was for construction, $1 million for river diversion, $2.5 million for bridges, over $3 million for right-of-way, $2 million for administration, and nearly $100,000 for maintenance. This colossal work on the part of the people of the city of Chicago will go down into history as one of the marvels of the 19th century. These are just a few of the wonders that surrounded the Columbian Exposition. We will be exploring the eighth wonder of the world in the next episode, which contributed greatly to the vast number of publications that were available for this event. So, if you're interested in learning more about the Columbian Exposition, stay tuned for the next episode, and you can learn about it with me.